Just waiting for everyone to get on. Mhm. There we go. Here they come. Good morning, Jeffrey.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
I'm good. I feel like we're the first ones. Here we go. More people coming on. Oh, more. Hi, Rosanna. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good,
How are
good
you, Mary?
I'm good. I'm good. Good morning, Sila. I've been doing these power walks, and I feel my legs are killing me now.
And it's hot today.
Yeah, you know what? I either go very, very early or I go after dinner.
That's what we do too.
When the sun goes down a bit, and it's nice. It just gets you out a little bit, and you're being careful. Good morning, Michaela.
Yeah.
This is great. This is great. I know we have a few more people coming, so we can just kind of chat, and I'll give it a couple minutes because I know a few people who said I'll see you on the call. Oh, here we go. There's more people coming. Here we go. There's a few things I want to talk about today. So I either think I need Jeffrey to calm me down, or at least let me look at it a different way.
Well, sometimes those two things are the same thing, right? Looking at it a different way allows you to calm it down.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel that it's interesting that I usually don't look at any social media anymore as I'm going to bed. But I was kind of hanging out with my daughter, and I was just we're flicking through some things. And it's true, when you see something late at night or just before you go to bed, not the greatest thing. So I'm going to begin. I know there's a few more that are coming on, but I'm big on staying to time and respecting everyone's time. So we'll start. So thank you everyone for being on the call. Again, I love these calls. I want to also say good morning, Preciosa. So Jeffrey, as I said, I noticed what had happened at Trinity Bellwood, the park. I don't know if anyone has seen what went on, where the parks opened up, and we're supposed to also be social distancing, but allow us to kind of take the kids out. I thought that that was great, to allow the kids to run around a little, or just get them out of the house a little bit more. And then it looked like this packed party. It felt like there was a concert. For me, there was like a concert going on with people an inch apart from each other. So what is your take on that, Jeffrey? I'm trying to be like very cool right now about it. So what is your take on that?
Well, it's kind of interesting because we, in the past, pre-COVID, we weren't really concerned about what people did. If we didn't like what they did, we avoided that, right? So if you would have walked by Trinity Bellwoods Park last summer and you would have saw a lot of young kids and being loud and maybe taking off their clothes or whatever, you would just sort of go the other way, right? And I think that the whole issue of what we're going through is how someone else's behavior may affect our health and well-being. And I think that's what's really bubbling up. That's really bubbling up. Now, from a spiritual perspective, it's kind of interesting because we all share the planet. And maybe we need to be looking at that a little bit more. Maybe we need to look at appropriate behavior. In the past, we avoided inappropriate behavior. We wouldn't tell someone if we're on the subway and someone is being loud and boisterous, you wouldn't go up to them and say, gee, you might be disturbing some other people. You'd sort of walk to a different car. And so I think that I think it's okay that we're being stirred up. I think it's okay that we're having the conversations. I think what's maybe not as okay is how we're having the conversations, how we are criticizing and blaming. I think there's this opportunity to come to a common behavior, a concern for our fellow inhabitants on the planet. And we need to have that dialogue. And I think in order to do that, there's a lot of criticism and a lot of things bubbling up to the surface. The one that I notice every once in a while is this vaccine, right? So
That
here
was
it is.
my next little
Right,
thing I
right.
wanted to talk about that I saw last night. Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of interesting that we're all being bugged by the same thing. I
Mhm.
think that it's kind of fascinating because I think that just means we need to have a conversation. We need to have a conversation about something like vaccine. Vaccine's a kind of an interesting one. The non-believers don't want the vaccine, but them not having the vaccine may affect the health and well-being of others. So very similar to the Trinity Bellwood situation, where what is our responsibility as citizens just for our own well-being or for the well-being of the community?
Mhm.
And the people who tend to be more responsible are really concerned about the ones that tend to be less responsible. And Mary, you and I have talked about it. We both hang out on the responsible end of the spectrum.
A little too much, I think, Jeffrey.
Sometimes, yes. Um, but that sense of responsibility is
Yeah.
really irked by those who are being irresponsible. And I would agree that the people in Trinity Bellwood are being a little bit irresponsible. Go
Well,
ahead.
I just want to say, something that for me triggered what happened in Trinity Bellwood was uh, it almost reminded me what we weren't doing right before COVID-19. Where this is just my own opinion. Someone may disagree and feel free to disagree. Um, Almost it was very self-absorbed. Me. I want to do what I want to do. I. I don't know why that just flat, and myself included, it brought up things and I went, oh my goodness, we were so about ourselves at times, even though we might have been giving, and all of us are, and I know that, but there was something of, I think what you said, it's a time to come together and go, what's best for all of us, rather than I want to go and I want to sit where I want to sit and I want to go to the park and I don't care who's beside me. That was just my take on that.
No, and I love that. I love that because you raise a really, really interesting point, and that is, and you and I have talked about this many times, to look deeper into what bothers us, what triggers us,
Yeah.
and so that trigger that you had towards Trinity Bellwood, and that trigger that you're having about the vaccine discussion, and all of the triggers that everybody is having, is an opportunity to go inward. From my spiritual beliefs, uh, what I believe is that if you're triggered, there's an imbalance, there's a disharmony, that we're not in balance. For some reason or other, what happened at Trinity Bellwood didn't bother me as much because I'm able to be more of the observer and watching and looking at it from a sense of objectivity. Although I find it, very disrespectful that people are doing that. But I'm able to look at them in terms of they obviously don't have the maturity and they don't take this issue nearly as seriously. But I wasn't triggered as much as some people. So my suggestion is watch for the things that trigger you
Mhm.
and go inward and try to figure out, why are you being triggered? What is it
I think
within you?
yeah,
Go ahead.
for me was from like a bigger perspective. That all of a sudden I love that we were all coming together. I love that on social media, we were saying, please stay safe. I love that everyone was making masks. I love that they were sending food to the frontline workers and creating masks. I love that we were coming together. It filled me up. My vibration, as you say, went up. What I saw there was the opposite for me, that we were again about only ourselves a little bit. That was just my take on it.
Right. And I think that's an important take. I think it's an important take because now they have served a purpose. You've sort of looked at, what about me and selfishness? What about me
Yeah.
and okay, and that allows you to shift because, and I know you, and you're an amazing influencer, and you've got an amazing organization.
I'll
So
pitch it later, Jeffrey. No.
so that shift is going to have a ripple effect because watching that event, okay, and triggering something in you that say we need to be kinder and gentler
Yes.
and more concerned to other humanity okay, with the people that you have in your organization, with the people that you connect with, that is a great service. It's a hell of a way to have that brought out. And that's the difficult part in this. And Schultesar makes it very, very clear. The darkness is our greatest teacher. So going through these triggers and looking inward and thinking about what you just did is going to be part of the solution. And I guess the question is, would you have thought about the selfishness that we were pre-COVID?
No, I don't think so as much. It really hit me in the face. It really did. I think I knew it, but it brought it out. Just that image was like, what is going on?
Yeah. So one thing that I would suggest is when a trigger comes up, thank the universe for bringing you that opportunity for some healing and some shifting. Yes. But prior to that, one of the things I'm going to suggest to people every week, I'm not really that big a list person, but for whatever reason, I always show up here on Tuesdays and suggest people make lists. So
I'm a list person, so I think our vibration is just
okay. That's where it is. I'm picking up on you. Sometimes we don't get an opportunity to process the triggers. So make a list of the things that have triggered you during this COVID-19 situation. What is it that, okay, and what's a trigger? It's sort of where you feel a little bit antsy, a little bit anxious, a little bit distraught, a little bit angry, a little bit frustrated. Any of those feelings are a sign that there is a trigger. And try not to figure it out intellectually. Just put it down on the list. Okay, I was triggered by. Okay, the crowds in Trinity Bellwood, the debate on vaccines, the way people talk on social media, whatever it is, okay, just mark it down and then take some time over the next few days to one at a time reflect on them from your perspective. Go ahead, Mary.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's what it was. I think what you're talking about. I love the fact that we were all coming together. I felt like we were the village, that feeling that we were all, in a village, they help each other out and all that. And what I saw there was we went back to our little corners where we all lived in our own little world, like go to work, do whatever you need to do, your family. We were losing that community. And they said, it's interesting. I was speaking to my, a couple of years ago to my children's family doctor, and she said the rise for anxiety in children has been also, and people, is that we are isolating. And she's a phenomenal woman. She says, we're isolating. She goes, the village is gone. That community, on the street, that family friend who watches your kids and they're playing on the street and people pop into your home or you're just gathering together and helping each other. It's really the four of, it's like my husband, myself, and my two kids. It's like all of a sudden the four of us live in our little bubble in many ways. Even though we give and we support people, and I have a huge community of female entrepreneurs, it's still like, go in the house, do this today. Where now I felt the world, or at least even all Canadians, were coming together. Anyways, that's my take. That's what I think aggravated me. I didn't want that to be taken away.
Right. But it does also raise the question, how should community behave? Because although we were coming together, the people in Trinity Bellwood Park were coming together, but they were coming together not respecting other people's concern about well-being. Mm-hmm. So, I think this issue is even deeper than just coming together or being isolated. I certainly agree that isolation is helping us understand that we need a sense of community. We need a sense of connection. We are programmed that way. I remember once I had a friend, and he termed it pair bonding. We are programmed for pair bonding. And if you sort of look at it, there is that desire to bond with other human beings.
Yes.
But the bigger issue then is, what is appropriate behavior in that community? What is appropriate behavior when you agree or disagree with another human being? I think that's a big, big opportunity that we have now, because all of this COVID stuff is bringing up the different points of view. Well, how do you and I handle things, Mary, when you have one point of view and I have a different point of view? Do we yell and scream at each other? Do we get frustrated? Or do we come from a place of mutual respect and try to understand the other person's
Yeah,
point of view.
absolutely, absolutely.
Right. And so, even within H.U.B, I can see this being an opportunity to create a code of ethics for your community because,
Well, it's interesting. I've always felt that way. And so I've had people in the organization that are extremely negative and dissect. I'm like, and I know they're not going to last. They just will not last in this organization. And this for me has made me realize I just will not allow that. We just launched online for H.U.B in Calgary to launch. And I said to my team, open it up to everyone. I want it to be community.
mm-hmm.
Not just Calgary. So I guess for me, so there we go. That experience at Trinity Bellwood was like, no, I'm going to find my own community. I get to choose how I want to run my organization and support people during this time and after COVID. And we've always said community, but it's even stronger for me now.
Right, right. And I think that's important as we are separated. Again, I think I've talked about it before. When your kids are small and you give them a timeout, the idea of the timeout is for them to reflect on their behavior. So when they come back from their timeout from sitting on the couch, that their behavior improves. Well, that's what we're experiencing is this timeout as a humanity. When we come back, are we going to pick up the old habits or are we going to think of new ways of engagement, new ways of connecting with other people? Are we going to be disrespectful like the Trinity Bellwood situation? Or are we going to be more tolerant? I mean, one of the issues we have, and Toronto is an extremely multicultural city. How can we become more cognizant, more kind, more empathetic towards other people's points of view? So I think that there's a great opportunity, and so one of the things that's really important is to still, even though we're sort of back into whatever it is, phase one, and there'll be phase two, we'll start coming back together. Don't give up on your reflection time. Don't give up on how can I create something different when this is all over, because my worst fear is that we are going to just go back to exactly the way we were. And if we do, I think that we are going to have more of these calamities, more of these opportunities for change. This is the universe telling us it's time to wake up. What we've been doing is not working. It's time to create. And I get the sense Sheltazar uses the term a new world order. And they've said that new world orders have come forth in humanity many, many times. And so this is like I'm sure I wasn't alive, but after World War I, after World War II, we had an opportunity to look at how the world showed up. This is just like that. This war happens to be against an invisible enemy, but if we lose this opportunity, we lose a whole generation of opportunity. And one of the things that we may want to look at is, and I don't know, I didn't look that closely at the pictures of Trinity Bellwood Park, but I think that a lot of them were very young people. And my wife looked and said, there was nobody in the picture our age.
Just proud.
Well, and maybe that's a comment that people that are more mature are more respectful. So what are we going to do with that generation that doesn't get it? The Me Too, the entitlement generation. It's like, you can't take away my freedoms. Like I argue with my youngest son who thinks that he's having his freedom taken away. Well, your freedom is being taken away because we're concerned about the health and well-being of other citizens of planet Earth. But, sometimes those 20-somethings, 30-somethings, they don't see it that way.
Yeah.
And so how are we going to have a dialogue with those people that we disagree with?
Yeah, and also you're right, is this younger generation who's really going to be taking over.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit. I wanted to also mention, when you mentioned the vaccine, for me, it's not that I'm against the vaccine. I mean, my kids are vaccinated. That's not it. And whatever people want to do. I think what popped up on social media that I didn't even think of it and it threw me off, someone mentioned, was people are scared to take it because it's we don't know if this is going to work or not. We don't know what they've created, any side effects. And for the first time, I just went, because I thought once they get the vaccine, I'm there. I'm the first one to take it. And then all of a sudden, the way it was said on social media, I just went, oh my goodness, I didn't even realize that. This is the first round. They're trying things. And so as much as they want to get rid of COVID-19, what happens if we do get this vaccine? And, you know, we've heard about it through history at times when people have been vaccinated or some new drug and what has happened. So I think there's going to be, and on this feed that I saw, there were more people saying, no, they will not take it.
Right. Yeah, you raised a couple of really interesting points. Over the weekend, I had a conversation with my son-in-law, and he's in the health services. He does works for a nonprofit that does blood testing. He brokers blood testing, and I asked him about vaccine, because I said, in my generation, my late mother-in-law had polio, and so vaccines were really important. I said, and we kind of trusted those vaccines, and like, what's wrong now? And what he explained to me, which is very interesting, is that over time, in order to mass produce these vaccines, they have added things that they didn't back then. So what he was saying is that the making of vaccines 20, 30, 40 years ago was safer and more controlled. And now, because they're being mass produced, that they are cutting corners, and they're putting in these additives that you see on social media that are trying to scare us by putting in, I don't even want to mention some of the things. It's obviously to promote fear. So, I think one of the issues is, how can we demand that our vaccines, that the things that the World Health Organization and all of the people that we trust in medical science are taking care of our greatest good? You brought up the issue of fast tracking the vaccine. Well, I wouldn't certainly want to be the person that has to decide, do we fast track it, and that's going to help 90% of the people, or do we slow track it and we have to deal with this extended, periods of lockdown while we perfect it? And I don't have the answer, but what I do believe is that we're not having the right conversations, and we're not having the conversations in the right way. Because it made total sense to me when my son-in-law said that they're fast tracking the manufacture of vaccines because of the demand. And that was kind of interesting, because that prompted me to look at population growth. And while we were sitting around the table, I Googled, thank heavens for Google, and I was astonished to see that approximately at this point, the world population is 7.7 billion people. At the turn of the century, in the year 2000, so over the last 20 years, the population in the year 2000 was 6.1 billion. We have grown in the last 20 years 1.6 billion people.
Wow.
Okay, and so there's the people in the park kind of thing, that everyone packed together. In the next 20 years, are we going to be up to 7, 8 billion, 9 billion? How many people can fit on the planet? And what are the repercussions of having this overpopulation? And maybe that's part of this dilemma of the vaccine. Would you rather they say, okay, we're going to make fewer doses of it, and we're going to pick who gets the vaccine in year 1, in year 2, in year 3, right? Okay. And unfortunately, the people that are going to wind up getting the vaccine later on are probably the vulnerable and the poorer. And so we have these major societal questions that we have to ask. And instead of just fighting about pro-vaccine and anti-vaccine, we're not getting to the root of the issues of where we're going in society. I mean, I did hear that overpopulation was an issue, but until you start to look at the numbers and you start to realize it, and we live in a very metropolitan city. I have to tell you, driving around Toronto these days, although it's kind of scary because of self-isolation. The traffic, I mean, I'm not nearly as aggravated. It's really interesting. It's like, you want to go somewhere? Oh, you can predict whether you go today, tomorrow, or the next day. You can predict how long it's going to take.
Yeah.
It was like, that never was the case, right? You'd go somewhere at 10 o'clock in the morning, and one day it would be fine, and the next day there was an accident, and it would take you twice as long.
Yeah.
So we have to start looking at these issues of population and entitlement. And I don't have the answer, but how are we going to have these conversations in a way that that takes into account mutual respect and not infighting, ways that we can put forward good solutions?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And I think a lot of fear is coming up. I think now with this vaccine being in the works and popping up, I think there's going to be a lot of people divided.
Yes.
I think there's going to be a lot of comments on social media, scaring a lot of people. And some things make sense to be uncomfortable with. I agree with that. But I'm so, again, I really love the coming together. And maybe that's my positive side, but I really enjoyed it, and the vibration I felt we could conquer anything together as a community. And now I'm just starting at times seeing the divide now because of what happened at the park with the vaccine.
And we need that divide so we can come together in a new way. You know, if it wasn't for COVID-19, I wouldn't be meeting these beautiful people that are on this call every week. You and I wouldn't be having this conversation. So there is an opportunity to create a new way of coming together. Thank heavens we have technology. But before we leave the vaccine thing, let me ask you a question. If a vaccine came out by the end of this year, Mary, would you take it, and would you recommend it for your children?
I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know. I'm pretty good at making decisions and going within, and I am right in the middle. I really don't know.
Right. And so my answer to that would be okay with I don't know, because the vaccine isn't out right now. And when the vaccine comes out, trust the fact that your intuition, that your guidance will guide you, that you will understand the difference between fear. Because all of what we have now is hypothesis. We don't know what the testing is, right? And we don't know what the vaccine is going to look like. But when it does come out, there's going to be information that we will be able to evaluate. And that raises this other pet peeve of mine, which is, why are we so anxious for the answers that we do not know as the future unfolds? Be here in this moment. Right now, there is no vaccine. Right now, we are coming out of our lockdowns. We are into whatever the stages are. And we wouldn't have predicted that people would have done what they did at Trinity Bellwood Park, but they did. And when we come into the next stage of opening, we don't know what's going to happen. Shaltazar makes it so clear that this is an opportunity to become more comfortable with the unknown. As a human species, we have a lot of difficulty with that. Okay? And I know my wife is always saying, well, what about this? And I said, I don't know. I mean, I don't know is really becoming my favorite phrase. And as I keep saying it, I'm okay with it. I was raised, it was very interesting because, you know, at a young age, I went into the family business, and my uncle had passed away, and my father would always go home for a nap in the afternoon. And in high school, I would go out to the business, and I would lock up, and because I really felt bad for my dad, and I would come home at dinner time, and he would quiz me on what happened here and what happened there. And I really developed this belief system that if I didn't have the answer, I was inadequate. Okay. And I worked through that for a lot of years, until I went on my journey of self-discovery. And even though I was on my journey of self-discovery, it's only within the last couple of years that I'm really, really comfortable with, I don't know. Wow. And I invite everybody, take a moment and just say it. Say, I don't know, and get a sense of how that makes you feel. Does it make you feel okay and liberated, or does it make you feel inadequate and nervous? All right, so on the count of 3, I'm going to say, I don't know, and just say it and go within and see if you can get a sense of your pulse. I don't know. Yeah. How does it make you feel, Mary?
For me, it's freedom, because
Oh.
again, I was raised as the fixer. So it's
Mm-hmm.
been amazing, and for many, many years. And even with my children, sometimes I would go into fix mode. So for me, that's very liberating, and makes me feel human, not robotic to what's next, what do I got to fix. So for me, it raises my vibration. It's
Right.
interesting that saying I don't know would make me more relaxed and raise my vibration than fix something.
Well, because as a society, we're taught to know the answers, right? I mean, in school, go back in school and the teacher asks you a question and the teacher's finger points at you and says, Jeffrey, and think about, I don't know, how that would make a young student
Right.
feel. So we need to reprogram ourselves. So the answer to the question is, if a vaccine came out at the end of the year, would you take it and give it to your kids? The answer is
I don't know.
right.
Oh, I feel more calm and relaxed.
Well, right. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
And I channeled a message from Sheltazar fairly recently where they're encouraging us to stop asking the questions
Mm,
because the questions are just aggravating us. They're frustrating us, right?
yeah.
So I think it's really important that we become more comfortable with I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes, I think
I think
someone.
that Geeta has a comment as well. Oh, I can't hear. I can't hear you, Geeta. Can you turn it on? Hold on. Let me see if you're on. No, I don't. We don't hear you. Try it again. Oh,
Okay, can you hear me now?
yes, that's it. Perfect.
Okay. All right. I was just going to say, following along what Jeffrey was talking about, I think we're too much in our heads, as Einstein used to say, we have this amazing gift of the mind, but it's supposed to report to the heart.
Mm,
But we have taken the servant that's supposed to be reporting to the heart and making that the master when the master is really supposed to be the heart. And getting out of our heads, I think, is going to give us a lot of answers that we don't have to be fearful about, because that comes from the I need to know.
you know what? That's excellent. Thank you, Geeta. And I'll be honest, the work I've done with Jeffrey was to get out of my head and go to my heart. So it's interesting, when I started H.U.B Inc., it was all head, to all my decisions now are made from the heart, and I'm good with it, and more relaxed about it. But I would never have thought that I would do that 5 years
But I
ago.
think that's also because as a society, like Jeffrey was saying, we are so taught to rely on that process, saying,
Yeah.
you have to think about it. But, when 11, bits of information bombard our energy field, they all report to the gut. It goes from the gut to the heart, heart to the brain.
Yeah.
And by the time it gets to the brain, it's all filtered. So you're not going to get all of the 11 billion bits of information.
That's actually interesting. That's great what you saying that. And I believe that when we, and this is my take, that when we are so much in our head, I feel that's when you're more like a fixer, controlling your thoughts and
Yep.
what you have to do next, and moving towards the future always. Where I think your heart allows you to surrender and just be in the moment, whatever you need to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Jeffrey, your take on that too?
Yeah, that raises a great point. I definitely agree that we are too programmed speaking the language of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we'll just take a couple minutes and I can share my beliefs on this. The language of the heart, or the language of feelings, is very, very different. And if we're going to start moving to the heart, and I know a lot of people talk about that, and I had a client who worked for an organization called the School of the Heart, and yet when I was working with them, he walked, he spoke the talk, but he didn't walk the talk, because the language of the heart, the language of feelings, is very different, and it tends not to be accepted. One of the things we're going to have to realize is that society doesn't really encourage the feelers. One of the big things I'm seeing with my grandkids is I think that they are really feeling a lot of stuff, not being able to go to school, not being able to play with their kids in the playground. And I don't think, as parents and grandparents, we are talking to them with the language of the heart. We're trying to logically help them figure this out, and there is no logic. So one of the things that I believe is that the language of the mind is very linear, it's very logical, it's very pedantic, it's very pro-con, that kind of thing. The language of the heart, or the language of feelings, is very in and of the moment. So the heart one morning will get up and say, oh, I feel this way. Mm-hmm. And by the afternoon, it would change completely, right? And so the feelings are very fickle, where the mind, you're taught to make up your mind, be decisive. Feelings are not decisive. So I encourage people to sit with their feelings a little bit and see if you can understand how different they are. Even trying to put a label on your feelings. Many times I teach people that feelings are like a soup. And you know, if you call it vegetable soup, it has a whole bunch of different ingredients in it, but it's called vegetable soup. So if I'm frustrated, that's my frustration soup. But sometimes my frustration has a little bit more anger in it, and sometimes it has less anger in it, and sometimes it has these other components. So try not to put your feelings in a box and think that they are the label, because they're not. For example, sadness. Sometimes I find sadness a very beautiful, calming feeling. And sometimes I find sadness as a very lonely, depressing feeling. And so, you know, here it is, you know, my wife will say, you're feeling sad, and she's assuming it's the depressing, lonely feeling, but it's not. It's really that calm, tranquil feeling. So it's really important, and only you know your feelings. So start to understand the language of feelings and how different it is from the mind, and check in with those feelings and see if you can let them speak to you. Once again, I've said this many times, Shaltazar says that we should acknowledge our feelings, we should accept them as our best friend, and we should let them speak to us. And so going back to the beginning of the call, Mary, where you had a certain frustration with what happened at Trinity Bellwood Park, talking about that, you'd realize there was a trigger and you would surface a truth. So I think it's really, really important to focus more on our feelings, because I believe that they're truth, and learn to speak that language. It's a very different language than the language of the mind.
You know what, I agree. And I think also when you talked about how we speak to the children, what we're trying to do is, you know, keep it as positive as possible. Look at that this is our time together. You know, I even joke, I told my son, you kept saying, why do we have to go to school? Why do we have to go to school? I said, did you manifest this? So, you know, we joke around, or he's like, what do we need math? I'm like, oh my goodness, Michael, you even got out of math. How did you do that? So it's adding humor and having discussions and speaking to them. I have 2 kids that are graduating, one from grade 6 this year and one from grade 8. So we're putting together a creative graduation party. They don't know, they just know it's happening. And one day they're going to wake up, and my husband and I have this little whole day plan that we're putting together. And it's not how it would have been, but sitting with, oh, it's too bad it's not that way. We're creating it in a different way, and they're getting excited about it.
Yeah. But we have to realize sometimes, you know, you talked about the fixer. Sometimes when someone is exhibiting a lower and slower emotion, we like to go in and fix them. We like to go in and shift them. If they're angry, we want to help them let go of their anger. If they're disappointed that they don't get a graduation party, we want to sort of give them a different graduation party.
Was that the fixer in me?
Well, you know, yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with trying to help them shift, but the interesting thing is to let them feel that this is kind of fun, but I still miss what I would have had, right? And both of those are okay. And so I'm a big fan of the field check, okay? And as adults, I highly recommend several times a day, just stop and check in with your heart and say, how do I feel? In order to do that, you know, as Geeta pointed out, we have to stop the brain from being in charge. We have to say, please step down, mind. I want to check in with my heart. And for me, I like to sometimes just take a deep breath and put my hand on my heart and say, how am I feeling, right? And if you can do that, then you are shifting away from the mind, which tends to be the fixer. Because the mind doesn't want us to feel uncomfortable because we've given it the job to protect our broken heart. I've coached so many people who have had emotional trauma and they weren't taught how to deal with the emotional trauma, and they made an unconscious deal with their mind to protect that trauma. And as a consequence, they've limited their ability to feel because they want to not feel that trauma feelings. They don't want to feel the lower and slower emotions, but what they don't realize is they're also limiting their ability to feel joy and love and beauty and grace. And you know, feelings are like that. They sort of go like this, right? You can't sort of say, oh, I don't want to feel the lower and slower, but I really want to feel the higher and faster. I want to feel the love. It doesn't work that way. If you've cut off your ability to feel, you're not going to feel the joy or the bliss as much. So to a certain extent, you know, as far as feelings goes, we're walking around as a society of flatliners, right? We're really,
Wow,
you know, we're not feeling as fully as we could. So number one, as parents try to do that, but number two, you know, maybe at the dinner table, how are you feeling, right? In the case of the graduation party, when they have, you know, the graduation party substitute that, you know, the amazing mom that you are is creating.
I'm not even giving them a graduation. It's gone. They can just be at the dinner table. Tell me a couple of your feelings. That's it.
Well, but it's really important when the kids, or even as adults, we open up
Yes.
to the feelings that we're having. How could we be going through this trauma and not feel frustrated, afraid, what's going to be next? I mean, there's not only the physical fear, but we've got financial, we've got so much. And I truly believe it's an opportunity to bring those darker feelings to the surface. And I think, of course, the answer is to apply love. Love that which you do not like. Love the frustration. Love the disappointment. And to love is not necessarily to like. That's an important thing. You know, sometimes my parents, I didn't like them, but I always tried to love them to the greatest ability that I could. So when we have those feelings that are uncomfortable, how can we love them? How can we, it's like holding them in our arms and saying it's going to be okay, right? But don't try to fix it. Don't try to make it go away. Feelings are energy and motion. They're emotions, energy and motion. And if the kids today, and I'm really concerned about this, if the kids today are not being given a proper outlet for their feelings, if parents are trying to just justify it and saying, oh, you're supposed to feel lucky, right? Well, if you don't feel lucky that you don't get to go to school with your friends, even though you live in a nice home and you've got a backyard to play in, if a kid doesn't feel lucky, a kid doesn't feel lucky. Don't try to make them feel guilty for not feeling lucky. Just allow them to express how they're feeling, the key in a healthy and appropriate way.
That is an excellent point that you mentioned, Jeffrey. And I think that's also for adults, whatever we're feeling as well, you know, because sometimes I notice that I'm like, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I have my home, I have my husband, I have my 2 children, we're all healthy. I go into that, and that's how I was raised, you know, you should be grateful, and I am. But I think you're right. I think it's okay also to say I'm frustrated, I'm feeling scared. I think it allows us to be more present and be more in touch with who we are.
Yeah, and you raised a couple of interesting points. One is that by allowing yourself to feel frustrated, you may find that later that day, the gratitude comes up naturally. Because frustration will move to gratitude. But if you're feeling frustrated and you don't think you should be, and then you try to substitute the gratitude, then you're mixing up that whole feeling consciousness. Then what you're trying to do is use your head to work, you know, to be able to to be in charge of the heart, like Geeta said, okay? If you feel frustrated, feel the frustration, express it in a healthy and appropriate way, and I guarantee you that sometime in the future, you will shift to gratitude. The second point I want to make is I truly believe that what we were seeing at Trinity Bellwood Park was an inappropriate expression of feelings that those young people were having. They were really, whatever they were feeling, they thought that going against the rules, that gathering in the park, that was probably a frustration, a limiting of freedom. But if they could have been taught how to express it in a more healthy and appropriate way, then maybe we wouldn't have had the conflict that we do.
Okay, I've just had what Oprah says, the aha moment. This for me has been a huge shift. This has been incredible. Geeta, I think you had Geeta, did you have a question or?
No, I just wanted to also comment on that. Just like, Jeffrey was talking about, keep that feeling in your heart. One of the things that, I teach people to do is go into that emotion with your loving presence and hug it. Hug that sadness, hug that frustration, because you want to be as kind and gentle, because frustration is just as important as anger, just as important as bliss, just as important as joy. All of those emotions serve us in so many different ways, and we can't ignore them because they're part of who we are. Yeah. And yes, the mind, our protective personality, that's what it does. It just, tries to protect us from all these things, but we have to say, just like Jeffrey said, wait a minute, I'll get back to you. Right now, I need to go and hug this and be with that emotion. Because once you're with that emotion, it'll shift.
And also, I think that's how you shift. What I'm getting from you, Geeta, is the more we do that, the more we become aware of who we are, who we truly are, and the more we grow. If we don't get in tune with those feelings, it's what you're saying, Jeffrey, as well, is we flatline. And we put.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting, Mary, at the beginning of the call, one of the things you talked about, you set the intention about shifting. You wanted to talk about shifting. Well, there's no greater way to shift than to go into the feelings you're having and allow them to shift naturally. Because most likely what you were looking for, possibly from me, was an intellectual way to shift. And that's really not the way to do it. That's the problem. That's not the solution.
Well,
the problem is we want to use our mind to shift. And all we really have to do is drop down into the heart, feel fully, and we will shift.
Well, it's interesting. What just is coming to me, it's like when you see those news reports or interviews, they're discussing about this using their head, right? And they're coming a solution and they're justifying in this. So wouldn't it be interesting if these newscasts or these interviews are happening and they're using their heart to explain COVID-19, or at least just to feel COVID-19? So I think there's room for us to go to the feeling, but as a full community, not just like what we're doing right here, but how are we also reporting the news?
Right. Excellent. Couple points from that. One of the things that maybe we could do when we are reading that social media, for example, last night you read the social media, when we read things, when we watch things on social media, we are usually doing through our mind.
Yeah.
So whenever you finish reading an article or even partway through, stop, do that, put your hand on your heart, take a deep breath, disengage from your mind and say, how is this making me feel? Okay, you probably would have slept better last night if you would have had an opportunity to process what that social media made you feel, right? So I think that's really important. The second point is, it's so interesting that you're talking about changing the way news is reported to be more heart-centered. Can you imagine if COVID-19 was the shift to help humanity become more heart-centered? Could you imagine how amazing that would be? Okay. And it starts with us. Okay. Do not think that this is a big world dilemma that we have to look for a big solution. If everybody on this call and everybody we talk to starts tapping into their feelings, learning the language of feelings, starts doing field checks, talks to their kids about doing field checks, and read the news. I mean, wouldn't it be neat if that was the filter? You read the first paragraph of a story and you check in. How does it feel? If it doesn't feel good, you stop reading it. If it feels good, you continue to read it. Wouldn't it be amazing if this was an opportunity to become a more heart-centered, more feeling world?
Well, it'd be interesting. Keith is giving you the two thumbs up. I think relationship with our children. I think sometimes even relationships with your partner, I think would shift as well. Also, relationship with friendships. Maybe some friendships that didn't have to end if we had tapped in with our heart and our feelings could have been saved, maybe, or at least communicated a different way.
Can you imagine when we come back together as community, if we come back together being more heart-centered? Okay, Mary, you have many events. Wouldn't it be interesting if someone circulated around that event and was able to build trust, saying how you feeling, and they say, oh, fine. And by the way, anybody that says fine or okay, there's something wrong. There is something wrong when you say fine or okay.
I had someone early on one time, and it threw me. I said, how you feeling? They go, excellent. That to me was such a vibration, like, oh, no, you're not.
Exactly.
Over the top. I'm like, well, I don't feel excellent.
Right. And so wouldn't it be interesting in social gatherings, in community, if we could help people open up? Brené Brown is a big fan of vulnerability. I believe vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. And if we can help people realize that being more feeling centered is a better way, then I think we will help people open up. I think we will help people open up. What would it be like on Saturday if we had a group of heart-centered people walking in the crowd at Trinity Bellwood, asking those people how they were feeling and helping them process the feelings in a more healthy and appropriate way?
Well, that would have been a huge shift, energy in that park for sure.
And it starts with us. So please, starting today, do your field checks, check in with your feelings, and watch your feelings. I've watched my feelings. They're fascinating. I get up in the morning, after a night's sleep, and I usually lie in bed and give myself Reiki, and I'll notice some lower and slower feelings. And one thing I notice is a shower always shifts my energy. I'm sitting there saying, oh, this is going to be a terrible day. Oh my goodness. I got lots on my agenda, and then I just get in the shower and I let the water pour on me. And for some reason or other, that shifts my feelings. I don't know what it is, but it's really amazing. So become aware of the things that shift your feelings. You ask the question, how do I shift? Become aware of what shifts you. If you eat, I don't want to say inappropriate food, but if you eat food, like food that's full of sugar, notice how you feel before. Okay, you're probably craving something. You're probably feeling lower and slower. You eat that sugar and you notice a false high. In a few hours later, you notice you're back to where you were before. Become the observer of your feelings, and you will get a better understanding of your truth and who you are.
This was incredible. Does anyone have any questions, any comments before we close up? Just want to give the floor to anyone who would like to add anything. No, we're good. Geetha, anything? You good?
Great call, everybody.
Yeah,
I love being in this conversation because it just fills my heart with joy, because I love what's happening, because like Jeffrey says, this is a call for humanity to be heart-centered, and what a great way to do it.
Yeah, and you know what? It's interesting when we get on these calls. Someone said, Jeffrey, someone said to me, called me up and said, actually, Phyllis, I think you mentioned it at one time too. Do you guys rehearse? Do you practice? Do you have questions? I said, I don't have any questions. I go with my heart when I'm on these calls, and I don't even know what we're going to talk about. We don't even have a script or a topic. It's whatever is happening, maybe in the world or we're feeling, and it just comes up. So I'm really glad to do it that way, because it's almost like a journey. I don't know what to expect. And I kind of enjoy the call that way. And I hope everyone else does too. So thank you for being on the call. Thank you again, Jeffrey, everyone, and
Thank you.
have a wonderful week. Be safe, and we'll see you on next Tuesday. I love this group. At
Thank you.
Yeah, one final note, please invite someone to join us next week, because I think, you know, I see a lot of the same faces, and that's wonderful, but we want to spread this. So 2 things: invite someone to join us on the call. You know how to get the link and share that link. And second of all, share the conversation about feelings with at least one other person. Just bring up the subject. If you get someone that says, oh, I don't want to talk about feelings, well, forget about that person. Try someone else. Try to have a meaningful conversation with one other human being about becoming more heart-centered, about becoming more feeling and less thinking. Last week, the big takeaway was feel more, think less. We delved a little bit deeper into that this week. So have that conversation with people, and let's start the revolution, the heart revolution.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Enjoy
you all.
your day. Be safe, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.